Hello, this is Ian, Somerset News Network. I'm watching YouTube this morning while I'm having breakfast before I go out into my workshop. Oh, right, little interruption there, just sort of sort my screen out. Now, question time, BBC. How do illegals manage to get into the audience of the BBC? I bet they haven't got a TV licence, so they're not paying for the BBC. So what right have they got to be on a BBC programme? Now, if you want to go on to a BBC programme, like Question Time, the perception that we've got as the public is that you write in and ask to be in the audience. And there's a form on the website. And if you manage to get on a programme and get the ticket, you're in the audience. They obviously vet you before you go, but they try and get an audience that is Labour, Lib Dem, Conservative, I don't know, Communist, far right, whatever. And they try and get a mixture. That's what they're supposed to do. And you ask to be on the programme. But I suspect, in reality, and with the illegals being on QT, this has proven to be wrong. The BBC must be actively going out and seeking illegals for the programme. Is it right? I don't think so. I don't think the illegals would be asking to be on a BBC programme. I don't think they'd even know how to do it. So, the BBC are actively trying to get illegals onto their panel, onto the audience of Question Time. Why? To skew the narrative. The illegals are friendly and nice and good people. Not that they're rapists and murderers and maybe terrorists. Some of them have been thrown out of their own countries from mental institutions and prisons before they get here. The government has a company who manages the illegal immigrants. The name is not said very often. And I believe, I can't prove it, but I believe that company is Serco. There was a guy who had a rented house, and because of the new taxation on rented accommodation, he was selling it. The company that wanted to buy it for illegals was Serco. If you look at what has happened in the United States, what they were doing was you had USAID, and the government were giving that money. That money was then used for NGOs, non-government organisations, and allegedly charities. Now the charities would get the money, the NGOs would get the money. They'd give some of that money to Hillary Clinton and Biden's daughter, who had foundations. This is how the scheme works. They would then funnel the money, only 5% of it, because they're all registered in Delaware, where you only have to spend 5% on charity. And they would give it back to other NGOs that were doing charity work. And that what they were doing was helping alleged charities. And they were running a migrant trail for illegals all the way up through South America. From Panama to Mexico to America. They had way stations on the way to house and feed illegal migrants, funded by USAID. That's the way the scam works. Now, we come to the BBC. We have boat people coming over, hundreds a day. They're from Eastern Europe and Africa. They're coming here because they can live for free. We house them, we feed them, we give them taxi rides. We give them free phones. We give them everything. You know? I wonder how much money they're actually getting a year. And I suspect it would be more than if you were on minimum wage and working in this country. There was a report, so I don't know if I can rely on the figures, but it's something like a migrant, the government pays this company that looks after them £270 a day per migrant. That's what it's costing the country. To house the migrant is about £120 a night in one of these hotels. And then you've got food and all the other freebies that we give them. Now, how do they manage to get onto the BBC? The BBC must go out and deliberately look for them to create the narrative. It's propaganda, pure propaganda. Now, do they get hold of a company like Serco that's looking after them? So, oh, you've got any nice lads, good lads that can speak reasonably good English, that we can dump in the audience, that we can ask them questions to make it look like they're part of the audience. I can't prove that it's done like that, but it bloody sure looks like it. We pay for the BBC with the TV licence. We pay for it. We now can't trust the BBC. I worked for the BBC for 6 months as an intern. Didn't get paid. I was a volunteer on a community programme. I saw how the BBC should work and the BBC guidelines and how reporters work. I used to be bussed in. I was asked to be a member of an interview because they needed somebody with an alternative point of view. So you had pro and con items. There was a duck shot with a crossbow on a lake in Bristol. In the gun shop where I work, we sold crossbows, and we sold crossbows and bows and arrows. We sold them to the scouts and the guides and tree surgeons. To put a line up in the tree, they used a crossbow, and it had like a tennis ball, like a solid tennis ball on the end, so they wouldn't stick into the wood, and they'd fire it over the branch. And they'd fire a light line, like a piece of string, and then put the rope up, so that they could get up the tree. So we were selling bows and arrows and crossbows legally. Alright? For legal activities. But because I sold crossbows, I was the bogeyman, according to the BBC. Would you come in and talk about selling bows and arrows? And I said, yeah, of course I will. Anyway, went into the BBC, and we're in what they call the green room. You wait before you go in. And with me is a RSPCA inspector. Now this inspector, I know, I repaired his shotgun the week before. And we had a chat, and he said, oh, shotgun's working fine. I said, oh, great, brilliant. Now, they didn't know we knew each other. We walked in the studio, we got the cans on, that's the earphones, and microphone, we had a mic test, and they went to the RSPCA officer first, and he said his piece about that it was the duck was shot with a crossbow on the pond, and he told what happened. They came to me. Now they thought I was going to defend it. Honest. So I said, well, it is illegal to use a bow or crossbow to shoot a wild animal in this country under the Countryside Act 1968. You should have seen the interviewer's face. That is not what they wanted. And I agreed with the RSPCA officer, and I then followed up by saying, if anybody has any information on who did this, would they please let the police know? I've never been thrown out of a radio station so fast in my life. Both of us were ushered out. It was supposed to be a 15-minute interview. It lasted less than 3 minutes. And thank you very much for coming, bye. Anyway, we went outside, and he said, oh, do you want a cup of coffee? I said, yeah. So we walked down. It's on White Ladies Road. So we walked down, went into the cafe, sat down and had a chat. He said they didn't like that, did they? And I said, no. They expected me to okay shooting an animal that's illegal with a crossbow. I said, the BBC are skewed. And they never asked me what I was going to say before I went. They just assumed that I was going to take a position that okayed shooting animals with crossbows. Now, this is how the BBC manipulate things, or try and manipulate things. Then we come back to question time. It was a setup. It was organised. The BBC should be ashamed of ourselves. It is our money that is being used for this. You've got the Diane interview. They now say that Diane was shown false emails that made her paranoid, may have contributed to her death. Do you understand what the BBC are doing? You've got the Prince Andrew interview. I don't think the Andrew was very wise to do it. But you had the BBC Andrew interview. There's other instances as well. But how many little bits of the BBC do we not see? Another example I use... Oh shit, what was it? Another example. What was I going to... Oh yeah. Another example I use of trying to explain how the BBC manipulate the news line, the news story, is Have I Got News For You. Now, I was a fan of I Got News For You. I found it interesting. Until I had ClimateGate emails on day 2. It was released on the internet. And if it was leaked or if it was hacked from the University of East Anglia, we still don't know. But the emails of the people that did the climate models and how they manipulated the figures was released. I went up on the train to London to a government meeting with the Department of the Environment. I had 2 hours up and 2 hours back. I plugged my laptop into the wall of the train and I went through the emails. I found an email from the Met Office. The Met Office were asking the scientists that were doing the modelling not to come up with scenarios that prove that the weather is normal. They told them to fix the bloody figures. And then you had emails between these scientists. They were downgrading the medieval warm period. If you had a cold spell, they were putting it up. So you had a flat line on the graph. And then they said using CO2 is a greenhouse gas. And then it went up. And that's where we got the hockey stick graph from, with the modelling that was done at the University of East Anglia under a guy called Dr. Jones. I think he's Professor Jones. I think he's been promoted. The hockey stick graph comes from a guy called Mann in America. And who does the BBC get to talk about climate change, they call it now, not global warming? They get Mann on to explain that CO2 is polluting the atmosphere. The fact is that CO2 is not a pollutant. It is plant food. I got a graph somewhere. It's on my Facebook page. And it shows 40 million years ago, at the time of the dinosaurs, that there was 4,000 parts per million of CO2, and that slowly goes down over the years. And today, it's round about 300 parts per million. So it may not be a question of cutting CO2, it may be a question that we should be pumping out more CO2. More CO2 means better plants, more food. Do you see? Do you understand how this works? But the BBC are so blinkered to this climate change and working with the government, so the government can put taxes on carbon. It's all to do with power and control, and the BBC are the propaganda arm of the government. Yes, I'm ranting, because I can see the scam. We need the BBC to go back to its original intent and its original rules of engagement, if you like to call it that. And we also need to cut back so everybody can afford the TV licence. I'm not advocating scrapping the TV licence yet. I think the BBC, somebody should look at the money that BBC Studios get. BBC Studios is a private company, and BBC World. Because what happens is, BBC Studios make a programme. They then sell the programme to the BBC, and the BBC give them the money. BBC Studios then sell it to BBC World, and BBC World distribute that programme. Things like Strictly, Only Fools and Horses, Dad's Army, all the old programmes that we like. That's then distributed by licence around the world. How much of that money goes back in to BBC in London? And if they do make a profit, where does it go? Nobody knows. Nobody can tell me. The BBC is a con. And it's a con on the people that pay for it. The people of the country. It needs to be reformed. It needs to be looked at. And if it really is as bad as we suspect, then there is a question of asking whether they should still have the licence fee money. Because if they can't do it to the rules, they shouldn't have the money. Anyway, Ian, Somerset News Network, rant over for this morning. Bye bye.